The dusty platform of Cheyenne Station buzzed with the usual afternoon commotion as the westbound train screeched to a halt, black smoke billowing from its iron stack into the endless Wyoming sky. Among the passengers stepping onto the weathered planks was a figure that would forever change the fate of one unsuspecting rancher. Samuel McCarthy adjusted his worn leather hat and squinted through the prairie dust, searching for the woman he'd been corresponding with for 6 months. The letters had painted a picture of a gentle, fair-haired schoolteacher from Boston named Catherine Williams, seeking a new life in the untamed territories. What he saw instead was a dark-haired woman in mourning attire, clutching a battered suitcase and a small child's hand, her eyes scanning the crowd with the wariness of someone who'd seen too much of life's harsh realities. The woman approached him hesitantly, her voice carrying a slight accent as she spoke. "Señor McCarthy? I am Maria Esperanza Valdez. I believe you were expecting me." Samuel's weathered face creased into a frown of confusion. This wasn't the woman from the letters, the woman whose photograph had sat on his mantel for months. This was someone entirely different, someone whose very presence seemed to carry secrets as heavy as the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The child beside her, a boy of perhaps 8 years, peered up at Samuel with intelligent dark eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. Maria's explanation came in halting English, mixed with Spanish phrases that rolled off her tongue like a familiar song. She had received his letters, she claimed, though how this was possible when he'd been writing to Catherine Williams remained a mystery that would haunt the following weeks. Samuel McCarthy wasn't a man easily rattled. 20 years of ranch life in the unforgiving Wyoming territory had taught him to expect the unexpected, whether it came in the form of harsh winters, cattle rustlers, or broken promises. But standing there on that platform, looking into Maria's anxious face, he felt something shift in the carefully ordered world he'd built for himself. His ranch, the Circle M, stretched across 15,000 acres of prime grazing land, bordered by the Sweetwater River to the north and the Medicine Bow Mountains to the south. It was a successful operation, but it was also a lonely one. The nearest neighbor lived 12 miles away, and the town of Sweetwater Falls was a hard day's ride through terrain that could turn deadly without warning. Samuel had placed the advertisement for a mail-order bride not out of romantic longing, but out of practical necessity. He needed a woman who could keep house, tend a garden, and perhaps provide the companionship that the endless prairie nights made seem so precious. Maria's story unfolded slowly over the next several days, as Samuel struggled with the decision of what to do with this unexpected arrival. She had been married to a man named Diego Valdez, a silver miner in the mountains of Colorado. Diego had died in a mine collapse 6 months earlier, leaving Maria and her son Carlos with nothing but debts and the clothes on their backs. Somehow, through a series of circumstances that seemed too coincidental to be entirely truthful, she had come into possession of Catherine Williams' correspondence with Samuel. The Boston schoolteacher, Maria claimed, had changed her mind about heading west and had given Maria her place, seeing a widow's desperate need as greater than her own romantic aspirations. It was a convenient explanation, but Samuel's instincts, honed by years of dealing with drifters and con artists, told him there was more to the story than Maria was revealing. The first hook comes here, as Samuel discovered something that made his blood run cold. Among Maria's few possessions was a silver locket that he recognized immediately. It had belonged to his younger brother Thomas, who had disappeared 3 years earlier while prospecting in the Colorado mountains. The locket contained a photograph of their mother and had been Thomas's most treasured possession. When Samuel confronted Maria about it, her reaction was telling. She claimed Diego had found it, had bought it from another miner who said it came from a dead man's belongings. But her eyes wouldn't meet Samuel's, and her hands trembled as she spoke. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet there it was, dangling from a chain around the neck of a woman who had arrived under already mysterious circumstances. Carlos, Maria's son, proved to be an observant child who spoke little English but understood far more than he let on. Samuel found himself drawn to the boy, recognizing in him the same hunger for knowledge and adventure that had driven Samuel west 20 years earlier. Carlos had his mother's dark eyes but possessed an almost supernatural ability to read the land and the weather. Within days of their arrival at the Circle M, he was predicting rain hours before the clouds appeared, finding water sources that Samuel's most experienced ranch hands had missed, and displaying an uncanny knowledge of horsemanship that suggested he'd spent considerable time around horses. When Samuel questioned Maria about her son's unusual skills, she would only say that Carlos had learned much from his father's work in the mountains, where survival often depended on reading signs that others might miss. The ranch house, a sturdy structure of logs and stone that Samuel had built with his own hands, seemed to come alive with Maria and Carlos's presence. Maria proved to be an excellent cook, transforming the simple fare of beans, beef, and biscuits that had sustained Samuel for years into meals that reminded him of flavors he'd never experienced. She tended a garden with skills that spoke of years of coaxing life from difficult soil, and she mended clothes and household items with an efficiency that impressed even Samuel's hard-working ranch hands. But at night, when the coyotes called across the prairie and the wind whistled through the eaves, Samuel would sometimes catch Maria staring out the window with an expression of fear that seemed disproportionate to the normal concerns of ranch life. The mystery deepened when Samuel received an unexpected visitor. Deputy Marshal Jake Morrison rode up to the Circle M on a sweltering July morning, his badge glinting in the harsh sunlight and his expression grim with official business. Morrison had been tracking a group of outlaws who had robbed a silver shipment near Durango, Colorado, 6 months earlier. The robbery had been violent, leaving 3 men dead, including a mine foreman named Diego Valdez who had tried to protect the payroll. The outlaws had escaped with over $30,000 in silver coins and had seemingly vanished into the vast wilderness of the Rocky Mountains. Morrison's investigation had led him through a complex web of false identities, abandoned camps, and cold trails. But one clue had finally brought him to Samuel's door. A witness had described a Mexican woman and a young boy who had been seen near the mine on the day of the robbery, and recent inquiries in Cheyenne had revealed that such a woman had arrived on the train and been met by a local rancher. Samuel felt the world tilt beneath his feet as Morrison's words sank in. The deputy marshal was suggesting that Maria might be connected to the robbery, might even be one of the outlaws who had murdered her own husband. It seemed impossible. The woman who had been sharing his home, cooking his meals, and slowly winning his trust couldn't possibly be capable of such violence. Yet the coincidences were piling up like storm clouds on the horizon. Her mysterious arrival, the silver locket that had belonged to his brother, her knowledge of details about the ranch that she couldn't have learned from their correspondence, and now this connection to a robbery and murder in Colorado. Morrison requested permission to question Maria, and Samuel found himself in the impossible position of protecting a woman he barely knew against accusations that might well be true. The confrontation took place in the ranch house parlor, with Maria sitting rigidly upright in Samuel's mother's rocking chair, while Morrison asked his questions in the methodical manner of a man accustomed to dealing with dangerous criminals. Maria's answers were careful, measured, and delivered in English that seemed to improve dramatically under stress. She admitted to being near the mine on the day of the robbery but claimed she had been there to bring Diego his lunch, as was her custom. She had heard the gunshots and seen men running, but by the time she reached the mine office, Diego was already dead and the outlaws were gone. She had taken Carlos and fled, she said, because she feared the outlaws might return to eliminate witnesses. The explanation was plausible, but Morrison wasn't satisfied. He had other questions, harder questions about how she had survived for 6 months without money, how she had come to possess Catherine Williams' letters, and why she had chosen to travel to Wyoming rather than seeking help from authorities in Colorado. The second hook arrives with a revelation that changed everything. While Morrison questioned Maria inside the house, Carlos had been playing near the barn with Samuel's young ranch hand, Billy Patterson. In the innocent way of children, Carlos had begun drawing pictures in the dirt, images that told a story far different from the one his mother had been telling. The drawings showed men on horseback, a woman hiding in the rocks above a mine entrance, and most disturbing of all, a scene that appeared to depict someone signaling to the outlaws below. Billy, who had been raised on a ranch where survival often depended on reading sign and understanding what animals and people were really doing, recognized the significance of what he was seeing. He brought Samuel and Morrison to see the drawings just as Carlos realized what he had revealed and began frantically trying to erase them from the dirt. The truth, when it finally came out, was more complex and tragic than anyone had imagined. Maria had indeed been at the mine on the day of the robbery, but not to bring Diego his lunch. She had been there because she had discovered her husband's involvement with the very outlaws who would eventually kill him. Diego Valdez had been providing inside information about silver shipments, feeding details to a gang led by a vicious killer named Joaquin Murrieta Santos. But Diego had grown uncomfortable with the violence and had decided to go to the authorities. Maria had learned of his plan and had rushed to the mine to warn him that Santos suspected his betrayal and was planning to eliminate him during the next robbery. She had arrived too late to save Diego's life, but she had been close enough to witness the robbery and see where Santos had hidden the stolen silver before fleeing. The silver locket that had belonged to Samuel's brother Thomas told its own grim story. Thomas McCarthy had been prospecting in the same area where Santos's gang operated, and he had apparently stumbled across evidence of their activities. Rather than reporting it to the authorities, Thomas had attempted to blackmail the gang, a decision that had cost him his life. Diego had been present when Thomas was killed and had taken the locket as proof of Santos's brutality, intending to use it as evidence when he finally went to the law. After Diego's death, Maria had kept the locket both as a reminder of her husband's courage and as potential evidence against the men who had destroyed her life. The coincidence of her meeting Samuel, Thomas's brother, had seemed like providence, a sign that perhaps justice might finally be served. The stolen silver remained hidden in a cave high in the Medicine Bow Mountains, and Maria knew its exact location. Santos and his surviving gang members were still at large, and they had been systematically hunting down anyone who might be able to identify them or lead authorities to their treasure. Maria's flight to Wyoming hadn't been a random choice but a carefully calculated move to find the one man who might have both the motivation and the means to help her see justice done for Diego's murder and Thomas's death. She had obtained Catherine Williams' correspondence through a network of women who helped widows and desperate families disappear from dangerous situations. Catherine had been a willing participant, understanding that her place as Samuel's mail-order bride might literally save Maria and Carlos's lives. Morrison found himself facing a dilemma that tested both his dedication to law enforcement and his sense of justice. Maria had technically been an accessory to multiple robberies, even if her participation had been coerced by her husband's involvement and her fear for her son's safety. But she was also the key witness who could finally bring Santos and his gang to justice. The deputy marshal proposed a deal. Maria would lead a posse to the hidden silver and testify against Santos when he was captured. In return, she would receive immunity from prosecution and a share of the reward money that had been posted for the gang's capture. It was a risky proposition that would require Maria to return to the very mountains where Santos was still hunting for her. But it was also the only way to end the threat that hung over her and Carlos like a sword. Samuel found himself volunteering to join the posse, driven not only by his desire to see his brother's killer brought to justice but also by his growing feelings for the woman who had turned his orderly life upside down. Over the weeks since Maria's arrival, he had come to appreciate not just her practical skills but her intelligence, her courage, and the quiet strength that had carried her through unimaginable hardships. Carlos had become like a son to him, and the boy had brought a vitality to the ranch that Samuel hadn't realized he'd been missing. The prospect of losing them both to the dangers that lay ahead in the mountains was almost unbearable. But Samuel understood that there could be no future for any of them until the ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest. The posse that assembled in Sweetwater Falls was composed of some of the most experienced lawmen and trackers in the territory. Besides Morrison and Samuel, there was Sheriff Tom Bradley from Laramie County, 2 federal marshals who had been tracking the Santos gang for over a year, and 4 local men who had proven themselves in previous pursuits of outlaws. Maria would guide them to the silver's hiding place, but she would not be required to participate in the actual confrontation with Santos. Carlos would remain at the Circle M under the protection of Samuel's ranch hands, an arrangement that the boy accepted with the stoic maturity that had impressed Samuel from their first meeting. The journey into the Medicine Bow Mountains proved treacherous from the very beginning. Santos had not survived as long as he had by being careless, and his network of informants had already alerted him to the posse's formation. The gang had set traps along the most likely routes to the hidden cave, and the lawmen found themselves under attack before they had traveled 20 miles from Sweetwater Falls. The first ambush came at dawn on the second day, with rifle fire erupting from the rocks above a narrow canyon that offered no cover and no retreat. Morrison took a bullet through the shoulder, and one of the federal marshals was killed instantly. The surviving members of the posse were pinned down for hours before Samuel and Sheriff Bradley managed to work their way around the outlaws' position and attack from behind. The running battle that followed stretched across 3 days and covered nearly 50 miles of some of the most rugged terrain in the Wyoming Territory. Santos proved to be a tactical genius, using the mountains themselves as weapons against his pursuers. He triggered rockslides that blocked trails, set fires that forced the posse to take dangerous alternate routes, and used his knowledge of the local water sources to drive the lawmen to the edge of exhaustion. But Maria's intimate knowledge of the area, gained through months of hiding from these same men, proved invaluable. She guided the posse through secret passages and forgotten trails, anticipated Santos's moves, and helped them avoid traps that would have decimated their ranks. The final confrontation took place at the cave where the silver had been hidden, a natural fortress carved into the face of a cliff that rose 200 feet above a rushing mountain stream. Santos had apparently decided to make his last stand there, perhaps hoping to negotiate his way out with the stolen treasure as his bargaining chip. But the outlaw leader had underestimated both the determination of his pursuers and the treacherous nature of his own remaining gang members. As the posse closed in, gunfire erupted not just from the cave but from positions on both sides of the confrontation. Santos's own men had apparently decided to eliminate him and claim the silver for themselves, turning the battle into a 3-way fight that raged until sunset. When the smoke finally cleared, Joaquin Murrieta Santos lay dead at the mouth of the cave, killed not by the posse's bullets but by one of his own men who had then been shot down by Sheriff Bradley. The stolen silver was recovered, along with personal effects that had belonged to Thomas McCarthy and several other victims of the gang's crimes. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Deputy Marshal Morrison died of his wounds before they could get him back to medical care, and 2 other members of the posse were seriously injured. Samuel himself carried a bullet scar across his ribs that would remind him of the adventure for the rest of his life. The journey back to Sweetwater Falls took 2 weeks, with the wounded men traveling slowly and the recovered silver requiring constant guard against other opportunistic outlaws who might attempt to claim it. Maria rode beside the makeshift stretchers, tending the injured with skills that suggested she had dealt with gunshot wounds before. Her gentle care and tireless dedication earned the respect of even the most hardened lawmen, and by the time they reached town, there was no question in anyone's mind that she had more than earned her immunity and her share of the reward money. The legal proceedings that followed were swift by frontier standards. Maria's testimony, corroborated by the evidence found in the cave and the confessions of the surviving gang members, painted a clear picture of Santos's reign of terror and Diego Valdez's ultimate heroism in trying to stop it. The reward money amounted to nearly $5,000, enough to give Maria and Carlos financial security for years to come. But more importantly, the threat that had driven them from Colorado was finally eliminated, and they were free to build new lives without constantly looking over their shoulders. Samuel's proposal came on a crisp October evening as they sat on the ranch house porch watching Carlos practice roping techniques that Billy Patterson had been teaching him. The boy had taken to ranch life with the enthusiasm of someone who had finally found where he belonged, and his laughter echoed across the prairie as he successfully lassoed a fence post for the 10th time in a row. Maria had been quiet all day, and Samuel suspected she was thinking about the offer she had received from her sister in California to come and live with her family in San Francisco. It would be a safer life, certainly, and Carlos would have better educational opportunities in the city. But it would also mean leaving behind everything they had built together at the Circle M. Maria's answer surprised him with its directness. She had never expected to love again after Diego's death, she said, and she had certainly never imagined finding happiness with a gringo rancher whose brother had been killed by the same men who had destroyed her first life. But Samuel had shown her kindness when he could have turned her away, courage when she needed protection, and patience when her secrets had finally been revealed. More than that, he had given Carlos something that no amount of reward money could buy, a sense of belonging and a future worth working toward. She would marry him, she said, but only if he understood that she came with ghosts that might never be completely laid to rest. The wedding took place in the Sweetwater Falls Church on a snowy December morning, with Carlos serving as Samuel's best man and most of the town turning out to witness the ceremony. It was a simple affair, but it marked the end of one of the most remarkable stories in the area's history. The Mexican widow who had stepped off the train claiming to be someone else had become the respected wife of one of the territory's most successful ranchers. The boy who had known too much about violence and survival had found a home where his unusual skills were valued and his innocence could be protected. And the lonely rancher who had ordered a bride and received a stranger had discovered that sometimes the best gifts come disguised as problems that need solving. Samuel McCarthy never did learn what became of Catherine Williams, the Boston schoolteacher who had given up her place as his mail-order bride. Sometimes, late at night when the wind howled across the prairie, he wondered if she had been a real person at all, or simply an identity created to give Maria a way to reach him safely. It didn't matter anymore. The woman sleeping beside him was real enough, and the life they had built together was more than he had ever dared to hope for when he first placed that advertisement in the Denver newspaper so many months ago. The Circle M Ranch prospered under Maria's influence, becoming known throughout the territory for its hospitality and its success. Carlos grew up to become one of the finest horsemen in Wyoming, eventually taking over much of the ranch's day-to-day operations and marrying a local girl who appreciated both his gentle nature and his mysterious past. The silver locket that had belonged to Thomas McCarthy found a place of honor on the ranch house mantel, where it served as a reminder that sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways, and that the connections between people can transcend death itself. Maria never forgot Diego or the terrible price he had paid for trying to do the right thing, but she learned to balance that sorrow with the joy she found in her new life. The ghosts she had warned Samuel about never completely disappeared, but they became manageable, transformed from sources of terror into memories that gave depth and meaning to the happiness she had found. Years later, when Carlos had children of his own and the Circle M had grown into one of the largest and most successful ranches in the territory, visitors would sometimes ask about the unusual story of how Samuel and Maria had met. The tale would be told around dinner tables and campfires, growing in the telling until it became part of the local folklore. But those who knew the real story understood that the most remarkable thing about it wasn't the mystery or the adventure or even the romance. It was the way two people from completely different worlds had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal from the wounds that life had inflicted on them. In a land where survival often depended on the willingness to start over, to reinvent yourself, and to trust strangers with your life, Samuel McCarthy and Maria Valdez had written their own version of the American dream, one that proved that sometimes the best things in life come not from getting what you ordered, but from having the courage to accept what you actually receive.